Hi everyone. It's lovely to see some familiar names popping up in the participants, including people that were at the Alice Meynell centenary event that I organised in 2022. So yes, I'm absolutely delighted to help launch this much needed new volume of Alice Meynell's poetry and prose, which I have here. And if you don't have your copy, you must get hold of one. So tonight, as we've heard, we're going to hear readings and reflections from Alex, who edited the volume, and from Laura, who is Meynell's great-granddaughter, and who provides the preface to the book. And then we'll have some discussion and Q&A. So my first job is to introduce Alex and Laura individually, and then I'm going to read my favourite Alice Meynell poem to start us off. So Alex Wong is the author of two collections of poetry, Poems Without Irony of 2016 and Shadow and Refrain of 2021, both from Carcanet. He's also the author of a critical study, The Poetry of Kissing in Early Modern Europe. We might hear about some Meynellian kisses maybe as well tonight, from 2017. And Alex edited the works of Walter Pater and Algernon Charles Swinburne, also for Carcanet. Laura Mulvey, for many of us in the academic world, I'd say needs no introduction. She is the Professor of Film Emerita at Birkbeck College in London. Her many publications include Visual and Other Pleasures, Fetishism and Curiosity, and After Images on Cinema, Women and Changing Times. She's also made 6 films in collaboration with Peter Woolen, including Riddles of the Sphinx and Frida Kahlo and Tina Modotti. And with the artist and filmmaker Mark Lewis, she has also made films Disgraced Monuments and 23rd of August 2008. I also recently learned that in August, Laura was elected to a BFI fellowship, which is one of the highest honours that they bestow. And I read today that there will be a Laura Mulvey season at the BFI in South Bank. So I'm sure we're all very much looking forward to that as well. So before we hear from Alex and Laura, they have kindly invited me to read my favourite Alice Meynell poem to you. So I've chosen Renouncement, which is one of Meynell's most famous and celebrated sonnets. It was written in her 20s and in her early career, but it was held back for slightly later publication, perhaps because of a revealing nature to the passion in the poem. The sonnet is rumoured to be inspired by Meynell's youthful love for a Catholic priest, Father Dignam, but I think the poem also shows the balance of passion and control that, as Alex states in his brilliant introduction, characterises much of Meynell's work as a whole. So I'm just going to read the poem to you, which should be appearing on your screen. I must not think of thee, and tired yet strong, I shun the thought that lurks in all delight, the thought of thee. And in the blue heaven's height, and in the sweetest passage of a song, oh, just beyond the fairest thoughts that throng this breast, the thought of thee waits hidden yet bright. But it must never, never come in sight. I must stop short of thee the whole day long. But when sleep comes to close each difficult day, when night gives pause to the long watch I keep, and all my bonds I needs must loose apart, must doff my will as raiment laid away, with the first dream that comes with the first sleep, I run, I run, I am gathered to thy heart. So I'm now going to pass over to Alex, who's going to do his own readings and tell us more about the volume.
Hello, I hope everyone can hear and possibly even see me. I just want to thank everyone for coming. I'm glad to see so many names that I recognize and also so many names that I don't recognize in the audience. I'd like to save most of the remarks for later, actually, and just read as much as I can in the time that I've got from the book. So I'm going to start straight in with one of the early poems. It's from the same sort of period as the one that Sarah's just read, Renouncement. And it's called The Visiting Sea. As the in-hastening tide doth roll home from the deep, along the whole wide shining strand, and floods the caves, your love comes filling with happy waves the open seashore of my soul. But inland from the seaward spaces, none knows, not even you, the places brimmed at your coming, out of sight. The little solitudes of delight this tide constrains in dim embraces. You see the happy shore wave-rimmed, but know not of the quiet, dimmed rivers your coming floods and fills. The little pools mid happier hills, my silent rivulets overbrimmed. What, I have secrets from you? Yes. But visiting sea, your love doth press and reach in further than you know, and fills all these. And when you go, there's loneliness in loneliness. And now I'll go straight to another early poem, To a Daisy. This one is again from the same period, from the first volume of poems that she published. This one is a little bit has had a bit more circulation. It was anthologized. It still, I think, is anthologized occasionally. And it's on a similar theme to some people may know Tennyson's poem "The Flower in the Crannied Wall." It's a sort of elaboration of that theme, and just a really brilliant, another brilliant sonnet from the early period. To a Daisy. Slight as thou art enough to hide, like all created things, secrets from me, and stand a barrier to eternity. And how can I praise thee well and wide from where I dwell, upon the hither side? Thou little veil for so great mystery, when shall I penetrate all things in thee and then look back? For thee I must abide, till thou shalt grow and fold and be unfurled, literally between me and the world. Then I shall drink from in beneath the spring, and from a poet's side shall read his book. O daisy mine, what will it be to look from God's side, even of such a simple thing? Okay, a bit of prose. And I'm going to read a couple of bits of prose this evening, just extracts from some of the essays. And actually, the versions I'm reading are slightly abridged, even from the extracts that you've got on screen, so it won't exactly match. But this is an extract from an essay called "The Rhythm of Life," which Henley, one of the great periodical editors of the period, published and said was the best thing he'd ever had the privilege to publish. Um, Here it is, "The Rhythm of Life." If life is not always poetical, it is at least metrical. Periodicity rules over the mental experience of man, according to the path of the orbit of his thoughts. What the mind suffered last week or last year, it does not suffer now, but it will suffer again next week or next year. Happiness is not a matter of events. It depends upon the tides of the mind. Disease is metrical, closing in at shorter and shorter periods towards death, sweeping abroad at longer and longer intervals towards recovery. Sorrow for one cause was intolerable yesterday and will be intolerable tomorrow. Today it is easy to bear, but the cause has not passed. Even the burden of a spiritual distress unsolved is bound to leave the heart to a temporary peace. And remorse itself does not remain, it returns. It has been found that several tribes in Africa and in America worship the moon and not the sun. A great number worship both. But no tribes are known to adore the sun and not the moon. On her depend the tides, and she is Selene, mother of Herse, bringer of the dews that recurrently irrigate lands where rain is rare. Her metrical phases are the symbol of the order of recurrence. Constancy in approach and in departure is the reason of her inconstancies. Juliet will not receive a vow spoken in invocation of the moon, but Juliet did not live long enough to know that love itself has tidal times, lapses and ebbs, which are due to the metrical rule of the interior heart, but which the lover vainly and unkindly attributes to some outward alteration in the beloved. And from there, I want to go back to poetry and to a slightly later poem, a poem from the kind of middle period. Um, this one is called A Day and a Life. And this is a particular favorite of mine, and one that almost never gets spoken about, even among academics who are interested in Alice Meynell. A Day and a Life. Clouds are mingled in changing grey, a rainy morning in spring, so be it. There'll be no revel of roses and May. Go back, children who came to see it. There'll be no noon on the hills today. No deep sky lost in the sun, but rain. No clouds like light in a light that is greater. The young sky weeps in a youth of pain, and though the sweet sun may send us later long glories over the level plain, yet there are slopes of eastern lawn among the hills, those morning places with souls to the early time updrawn, with tremulous dews and dreamy faces set to the fresh thoughts of the dawn, set to the innocent airs and sweet long sunshine of the morning only. Though the fair plain of wood and wheat shine rainbow-robed, their shadows, lonely, will darken the country about their feet. The sun may break, we will thank God for it, in a long bright evening. Who shall say, the dark veil fall? But the morning wore it, and many flowers will have done their day, and many birds will have died before it. I may come back to this one a bit later on because there's a lot to say about it, but I will move on now to another poem, a very short one, um, and in a lot of ways a very simple one. It's called Maternity. One wept whose only child was dead, newborn 10 years ago. Weep not, he is in bliss, they said. She answered, even so. 10 years ago was born in pain a child not now forlorn. But oh, 10 years ago, in vain, a mother, a mother was born. That poem is not autobiographical. Um, Alice and Wilfred Mennell had quite a lot of children, but they did lose one in infancy, and I'm sure that experience is partly behind this poem, and it's also, in fact, behind the next poem I'm going to read, Veni Creator, which is a religious poem that perhaps doesn't reveal very much about its relation to Alice Meynell's personal life. But there is a diary entry from the time of the bereavement that shows that the genesis of this poem belongs to that period and to that grief. And I think this is one of the sort of great religious poems of the 19th century, actually. So humble things thou hast borne for us, O God. Leftst thou a path of lowliness untrod? Yes, one till now, another olive garden. For we endure the tender pain of pardon, one with another we forbear. Give heed, look at the mournful world thou hast decreed. The time has come. At last we hapless men know all our haplessness all through. Come then, endure undreamed humility. Lord of heaven, come to our ignorant hearts and be forgiven. And one last very short poem, Cradle Song at Twilight. A very mysterious poem. The child not yet is lulled to rest. Too young a nurse, the slender night, so laxly holds him to her breast that throbs with flight. He plays with her and will not sleep. For other playfellows she sighs. An unmaternal fondness keep her alien eyes. And I'll finish just with another piece of prose, and this is from an essay about the wife of Dr. Johnson. It comes from a series of three essays that she wrote about the wives of famous male authors. Oh, well, in fact, not they're not all about wives, but the two that I've included in the book are about wives, and the other one is about the wife of Richard Steele. So, Mrs. Johnson. This paper shall not be headed Tetty. What may be a graceful enough freedom with the wives of other men shall be prohibited in the case of Johnson's. She with whose name no writer until now has scrupled to take freedoms whereto all graces were lacking. The essay owes thus much amends of deliberate care to Dr. Johnson's wife. What wish would he have had, but that the language in the making whereof he took no ignoble part should somewhere at some time treat his only friend with ordinary honour? Men who would trust Dr. Johnson with their orthodoxy, with their vocabulary, and with the most intimate vanity of their human wishes, refuse with every mark of insolence to trust him in regard to his wife. On that one point no reverence is paid to him, no deference, no respect, not so much as the credit due to our common sanity. When Samuel Johnson, at 26, married his wife, he gave the dull an advantage over himself which none but the dullest will take. He chose for love a woman who had the wit to admire him at first meeting and in spite of first sight. That, said she to her daughter, is the most sensible man I ever met. He was penniless. She had what was no mean portion for those times and those conditions. And granted that she was affected and provincial and short and all the rest with which she is charged, she was probably not without suitors, nor do her defects or faults seem to have been those of an unadmired or neglected woman. Next, let us remember what was the aspect of Johnson's form and face, even in his 20s, and how little he could have touched the senses of a widow fond of externals. This one loved him, accepted him, made him happy, gave to one of the noblest of all English hearts the one love of its sombre life. And English literature has had no better phrase for her than Macaulay's, quote, "She accepted with a readiness which did her little honour the addresses of a suitor who might have been her son." Her readiness did her incalculable honour. But it is at last worth remembering that Johnson had first done her incalculable honour. No one has given to man or woman the right to judge as to the worthiness of her who received it. The meanest man is generally allowed his own counsel as to his own wife. One of the greatest of men has been denied it. The lover, says Macaulay, continued to be under the illusions of the wedding day till the lady died. What is so graciously said is not enough. He was under those illusions until he too died, when he had long passed her latest age, and was therefore able to set right that balance of years which has so much irritated the impertinent. Johnson passed from this life 12 years older than she, and so for 12 years his constant eyes had to turn backward to dwell upon her. Time gave him a younger wife. No slight to him, to his person, or to his fame, could have had power to cause him pain more sensibly than the customary, habitual, ready-made ridicule that has been cast by posterity upon her whom he loved for 20 years, prayed for during 32 years more, who satisfied one of the saddest human hearts, but to whom the world, assiduous to admire him, hardly accords human dignity. Okay, I'll end there. Thank you. Um, so I think we have Laura now.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to start by reading an extract from the preface that Alex very kindly invited me to contribute to the collection, as I really wanted to say something personal about my great-grandmother, Alice Meynell, who I refer to by her initials, as was quite common in our family. Alex's selection of AM's essays concludes with 4 that, although not woman-related, have a special significance for her idiosyncratic writing style, as well as her way of seeing and relating to the world. These essays all revolve around her intense pleasure in natural phenomena, most particularly perceptions and sensations produced by their movement and their transience. This, Alice Meynell, counters the image that so often haunts her of austerity, reserve, reticence, withdrawal, etc. On the contrary, she writes as passionately about a passing cloud as she does about the rights of women. For the reader, these essays can transform old, habitual ways of seeing into unforgettable lessons in looking. It's quite usual to consider Alice Meynell's childhood, and most especially the influence of her father, Thomas Thompson, in any assessment of her character and her literary work. However, her original way of observing the world around her, as well as her extraordinary responsiveness to natural beauty, come from her mother, Christiana. Alice and her older sister, Elizabeth, who grew up to be an eminent painter, were educated by their father, whose outstanding erudition, intellectual precision, and devotion to literature were undoubtedly absorbed and emulated by his literary daughter. Vita Sackville-West, in her otherwise perceptive introduction to the centenary publication of AM's Prose and Poetry in 1947, sets up a dichotomy between the parents. She says, "It's easy to trace the influence of her father's austerity upon the spirit that later informed every gesture of Alice Meynell. On the other hand, the mother is described as somewhat feckless, ecstatic, sentimental, quotes, artistic example of Victorian womanhood." Christiana Weller, Alice's mother that is, had been a successful concert pianist when she married Tom Thompson in 1845, bringing her promising professional career to an end. From 1851, they spent half of every year in Italy, where Christiana began to paint. Her diaries record her responses to the varying lights and colors of the land, sky, and sea, their changeability, their transience, and her constant striving to capture these effects in their elusive moments of perfection. Her granddaughter Viola Meynell, in her memoir of her mother Alice, describes the diary entries as flying impressions. She said, "They telegraphed themselves onto the page as if they were recorded in the actual hurry of their happening instead of the quiet pause afterwards." Christiana's diary entries do indeed tend towards the ecstatic as she records her vivid visual impressions and emotions, swaying, as Viola puts it, from rapture to distress. For instance, after the distress of a cold, difficult journey, rapture. Sun shone sweetly, and 3 large trees on the opposite side of the place made waving shadows on the walls. Or when in Italy, magical morn, no white paint, despair. To reiterate, Alice Meynell learnt lessons in looking from her mother, not only her passion for natural beauty, but also her unusual responsiveness to everyday life. Christiana's ability, that is, to transform the otherwise ordinary into the extraordinary, into event and anecdote. In the quiet pause afterwards, the daughter's own observations of the everyday telegraphed the hurry of things happening onto her pages. And I now want to read from one of the essays on what I've called natural phenomena. She did one on clouds, one on shadows, one on reflections that Alex has included in the book. And you could include horizons, I think, with this selection. Reflections. The figure and the shadow have a companion, a third, a visiting creature who leaps from the mirror to the stream, is scattered and shattered by a ripple, turned into the most inventive burlesque by the minute distortions of a Neapolitan looking-glass, and restored to decorous precision and robbed of all its separate character and spirit by the perfect plate glass of London. The earth and her innumerable waters, and man and his innumerable windows, have for their heart of reflection the image of the sun himself. While that image burns within every stream, within every sea, within every lake, within every pond and pool of this world, the earth seems to multiply the very center of life. She goes carrying suns. It's dazzling to think of that cargo, that treasury, those guests and sojourners, those strangers within her gates, who are but one and yet so renewed. Of all the mental visions of the earth, this is the most brilliant. Suns lurk throughout her daylight, suns in her deep places, separate, single, and fervent. All the coolness of the summer contains these suns. They are the heart in the breast of waters. They lie in the ice of the north, round and still in the equatorial ocean, broken into sparks and spray by quicker seas. They're caught in the fields. The tides swing them up and up the coast and out again. The towns, moreover, light themselves with suns. 1,000 replies to the sunset shine in the windows of streets. Into a room looking to the west, the sunrise comes from the window across the road, a second-hand sunshine, but sweet enough to soften all the light. So hard from the unsunned quarter of a London sky, and bright enough to cast tender shadows. It's a charming secondary sunshine, with a look somewhat as though it shone through water, through shallow waves on a beach. The room has a spirit from the moment those visiting rays gain ingress, and they do but come from the windows that see the east. This is the best use that glass fulfills, and many an ugly London guillotine sash, filled with cheap glass, divided by dark bars, has, by reflection, an ardent centre of the sun. The mere windows of towns reflect the authentic sun. The mirrors carry his fire, dimmed but not altered. Now, I want to read one poem, if we still have time. But I just wanted to introduce it with a couple of notes. It's The Threshing Machine, and I'd like to cite Alex's extremely illuminating introduction to the poem's imagery. The poem begins with regret for the loss of the Christian symbolism of winnowing, the fan, the separation of wheat from chaff, taken from the Gospel of St. Matthew. Of the poem's later reference to Ruskin, Alex says, a resonant voice against the sweep of mechanization. Ruskin had told audiences in a lecture of 1883, human strength, unaided by machine, was still the only divine strength, and he called it the strength of Heracles. Now, a last note. Vala Meynell, who I just mentioned, her mother's future biographer, married John Dallon, a local Gresham farmer, in March 1922. His grandson, Mark Dallon, told me a few days ago that not only did John have a threshing machine on the farm, but also that its brand name was Hercules. Alice Meynell, we speculate, probably witnessed the harvest at her son-in-law's farm in the summer of 1922, before her death in November of that year. No fan in the hand for those young villagers beneath the trees, watching the wheels, but I recall the rhythm of rods that rise and fall, purging the harvest overseas. No fan, no flail, no threshing floor, and all their symbols evermore foregone in England now. The sign, the visible pledge, the threat divine, the chaff dispersed, the wheat in store. The unbreathing engine marks no time, steady at sunrise, steady at noon, inhuman, perfect, saving time, and saving measure, and saving rhyme. And did our Ruskin speak too soon? No noble strength on earth he sees, save Hercules' arm, his grave decrees, curse, wheel, and steam. As the wheels ran, I saw the other strength of man. I knew the brain of Hercules. That's all.
Thank you so much, Laura and Alex, for those wonderful readings and interesting insights as well. I did not know that about the threshing machine being called Hercules, so that's completely transformed the poem. So I've got some questions lined up for our discussion, but I'll also keep my eye on the Q&A. So if you're an audience member and you have a question, do put that in there, and we'll make sure that we cover those too. The first one is a sort of one to get us started, slightly different questions for Alex and for Laura. So for Alex, I wanted to ask what first drew you to Alice Meynell, and what impressions did you have about her work and perhaps of Meynell herself before you encountered her writing in more detail. And then for Laura, the question was, did you always feel this affinity with your ancestor Alice Meynell, or was this something that developed and increased over time? And how has your attitude towards her changed? So I don't know if Alex, you want to go first, and then Laura.
Okay.
I think Alex should go first.
Okay. Um, well, what drew me to Alice Meynell? I think Alice Meynell drew me to Alice Meynell. I can't remember that any. I mean, it may be partly because I love George Meredith, and I knew that George Meredith was a great enthusiast and admirer of her work and of her as a person. That may have encouraged me to keep going back occasionally to take a nibble, but as far as I can remember, she's a name that one comes across all the time if one's interested in Victorian Edwardian literature, and you see the books all the time in the secondhand bookshops and in Oxfam, and you find letters to and from her when you're studying other people, and so I just thought I'd better eventually buy some of these books, and I in fact bought several copies by mistake of the collected essays, I think, or poems, but didn't pay much attention to them really initially. I think I wasn't reading them very carefully, and they do require quite careful reading, or they reward careful reading. Um, so I think I wouldn't really call that a draw, but what in fact drew me was once I started paying attention to them, I realized how brilliant they were, and how poignant they often are too. I mean, actually, it's very difficult to read some of those passages without choking up a bit. It was just the sheer quality of the right. I have a great love of minor poets. Why wouldn't I, being one myself? But sometimes you come across someone who's treated as a minor writer, and but you start reading and you think, wow, this is a different level of achievement, and that's what I felt reading Alice Meynell. Finally, with enough attention.
Thanks,
Laura.
Alex. And yeah, Laura, obviously for you it's inherently more personal, I would imagine.
Yes, it's much more personal. I mean, Wilfred and Alice bought a home in Sussex with a bit of land attached and added some cottages for their daughters. They built a library onto it, and my family still collects there. And you came the other day. So we all, the great grandchildren, although none of us had known her, I remember my great uncle Wilfred well, but he died as a very old man. But so all of us great grandchildren grew up very much with acute consciousness of her, but not necessarily knowledge of her writing and the power of her writing. I accept a number of cousins of mine who did actually grow up appreciating her poetry and her writing, but I didn't so much. And what I've found just quite recently was that in my own area, which is film, I became really interested in the essay film. And I was told that the films that I'd made were essay films. So I started to be interested in the concept of the essay, and out of that, obviously, became attracted to, curious about my great grandmother's essays, and I started to read her. So I discovered her first as an essayist, and I've only recently really begun to admire her poetry so much. And hearing you and Alex read so beautifully has really drawn me to it even further.
Oh, thank you. And I love that phrase you use, lessons in looking, which I think is such a brilliant way to capture Meynell's kind of visuality and visual imagination, which, as you say in your preface, is so cinematic in its nature. Um,
And I
so
could even, sorry to interrupt, Sarah, but I could have mentioned that too, that reading her essays, I realize that she has a very photographic mind or way of looking in the way that she sees and the way that she turns incidents into anecdotes and so on. But I won't say any more. Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you are in the audience again, feel free to put things in the Q&A. But I'll press ahead with my questions. Oh, let me see. What's this? Oh, okay. We have got a question in the chat. Can I please ask Laura what similarities or inspirations she sees between herself and Alice Meynell? Is there a family resemblance? What would you say to that, Laura?
I don't think there's no, not really, but I do find that the more I read her, and I tried to put this into my preface, the closer I felt to her. I discovered her feminism was not just her support for the suffrage movement and for women's rights, but was a deeply affected her writing, her way of thinking, and her style. And that's impressed me very much. And I see her as a writer of women's writing.
Definitely. And speaking of the family resemblance as well, it really struck me at the recent kind of family launch event what a Meynellian sort of moment it is to see all those generations in a room together. She's obsessed with generations and genealogies as well. Okay, so yes, we have a question in the Q&A box. From Ian. So Alex, could you say a little more about the poignant aspects of her work? Thanks.
Um, what can I say about it? I think the thing about it is that she's very moving, but she never does the easy thing, I think. She doesn't sort of touch off easy emotion in the reader by giving the kind of ordinary cues that you might give if you were writing an episode of EastEnders or something in order to make people emote. I mean, it's very, I mean, I may say more about this in a minute, but she is quite an intellectual writer, more so than I think a lot of people realize at first sight. It's not always in your face. A poem like Renouncement doesn't really put you through your paces intellectually, but it rewards careful reading, and some of the poems actually really require it. And some of the essays require it. You really have to think carefully in order to make basic sense of them. So somehow that contains the emotion and makes it really quite powerful because it's in a way understated, constrained, dignified. Um, and I mean, a poem like Maternity or an essay like Mrs. Johnson to me are very, very moving. And Mrs. Johnson is one of those, and there are a few essays like that which I put in the book, which have really packed quite a punch morally. They're quite it sort of sits for me alongside things like Stevenson on Father Damien, or things like that. The great examples of a moving defense. A lot of the early poems, which relate more or less closely to that rather tragic and impossible love affair that Sarah mentioned earlier on, they are really very dignified in their suffering and very, very carefully thought through. And I think somehow that just heightens the sense of the depth and the reality of the feeling. I wish I could. I keep trying to remember this phrase from Francis Thompson about. I mean, I did quote it in the introduction, but it's he describes her poetry as something like Do you know what? I'll find it and I'll tell you
Is
later.
it the bit about the thought murmuring at the
It,
base?
it's like a monument of thought with feeling murmuring about its
Yeah,
base or something
it's
like that.
I've got it here.
Yeah.
So her poem's characteristic of, quote, imaginative thought with feeling murmuring about its base, which I underlined because it's such, a wonderful way of describing, as you say, that balance, isn't it, of passion and control and thought and feeling.
Precisely, and I always think it makes me think. I mean, I'm sure it's not what T.S. Eliot was thinking of at all, and he wouldn't agree with me at all about this particular poet, maybe. But it makes me think of Eliot's um, valuation of that kind of combination of thinking and feeling, which he sees in the metaphysical poets and thinks has kind of gone awry in the Victorians. But I think, in a way, Alice Meynell has some resemblance to those 17th century poets like Donne or Herbert, who really have the feeling and the thought working together.
Definitely. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat that are connected as well from Rebecca Watts. So the first one was, Alex, do you have any thoughts about why Meynell's poetic legacy wasn't acknowledged through the 20th century in the way that, say, Christina Rossetti's or Charlotte Mew's? Woo, Charlotte Mew, just want to say. Love Rossetti too, but in the way that their legacies have been. And then for Alex and Laura, sort of connecting to this idea of women's literary tradition, do you see Meynell as part of a tradition of women essayists? And particularly, Rebecca's thinking of Woolf's authority and visuality in her essays, and whether there's a through line from Meynell to Woolf. I mean, there's a lot. I feel like I could say a lot about that, but I won't because that's not what I'm here for. So, any thoughts on those questions?
Well, shall I start? I mean, I would like to hear what you've got to say about that too, also. But I mean, the first thing that to say about the second question is Wolf was really quite nasty about Alice Meynell, but I think there is a through line, and I think that's partly why she was so nasty. Um, but to take the first question, I think this is something that Laura and I have talked quite a lot about, and I think there are lots of things to say. Um, but it's clear that she hasn't really come back in the way that Christina Rossetti and Charlotte Mew have come back for the general reader, as well as for the academic. And why is that? Well, I think it's partly that she's a bit of she's less of a romantic figure than certainly Charlotte Mew in a way. She's maybe a bit less accessible to some people than Christina Rossetti. She makes you think a lot harder just to get the basic sense a lot of the time than Christina Rossetti does. But also I think it's to do with her association with Roman Catholicism, with kind of sort of moral decorum, austerity, all those things that Laura mentioned as being among the characteristics that have been imputed to her. So I think and then Wolf's dismissal hasn't helped, as it hasn't helped many people of that generation. So I think she just never became an easy or obvious heroine for the major feminist tastemakers in the 20th century. And partly her association with Coventry Patmore and the Angel in the House, for those that know about that and the associations there. Coventry Patmore was one of her great passions in a sense, and she was one of his great passions in a slightly different sense. Um, I think that hasn't helped her because she's become associated with this very Victorian, very religious idea of womanhood, which Laura and I think, both feel we'd like to challenge and doesn't quite seem
Yeah.
right.
It doesn't seem at all right to me. I mean, she was the least domestic, least angel in the house person that you could possibly imagine, apart from the fact that she had a lot of children, but she wasn't domestic. And as I hope I characterized her mother, Christiana, she was not brought up in any way to be interested in anything but intellectual things, natural beauty, and so on. She couldn't even darn a sock. Uh, and I feel that's a very poor characterization of her that's kind of stuck, unfortunately. But I would just like to say very quickly, because I know time's passing, that I feel that intellectual feminism has brought her back to a certain extent. And I see this, Alex, I know, I see this in your writing about her. So I would say feminism, not just as it were, as from a literal woman's point of view, but a kind of aesthetic understanding. And Sarah's very beautiful writing about her and time cites Julia Kristeva, and when I was writing my preface, I was also thinking in terms of French feminism and the way that her, I see as modernist, estranging um, way of writing is perhaps something that needs to be read as quite a dynamic, a dynamic woman's way of seeing and writing. I wondered what Sarah thought of that, if she would say a word.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just nodding. I'm nodding away. Yeah, I think I think in that sense, in the fluidity, the modernity, and the as you say, kind of feminist viewpoint in line with kind of French feminist ideas, I think her and Woolf are very much, it have affinities with one another. And it's for many of the reasons and the reasons that Alex outlined, that they're sort of set as if they're in two separate worlds and two separate centuries, when actually that they're approaching it differently in terms of their aesthetics. Woolf's modernism compared to Meynell's dedication to to fixed poetic forms. But actually, I think the essays are the clear way to see some of those connections. And thank you for your kind words about my work, Laura. So I am aware of time as well, as was Meynell. What I'm going to do is wrap Michael Schmidt's comment into my final question, because I think they actually connect together. So Michael's saying that as an editor, I resisted the formal and dictional archaism that gives Meynell's poems a varnished or an antiquated feel. And this is something that needs to be overcome if we approach her from this century. Her language isn't natural. This is not meaning to criticize it. Of course not. But this links into what I wanted to ask about, that Meynell's work can appear quite intimidating for various reasons, including those reasons, to modern contemporary readers, especially as Alex said, who kind of with a very, if you kind of, doing quite a speedy first kind of glance through. So what approach would you both recommend as a way into her work? And are there any particular essays or poems that you would recommend that readers start with?
Shall I start this time?
Yes.
Yes. Well, my favorite essay, which I might have read from, but it's very difficult, is A Woman in Grey, which comes, I won't describe it because we don't have time, but I think it's a very brilliant essay, and the writing in it breaks with convention and uses language in a what you might call a poetic way, but it's also this kind of distanciation and estrangement from a literal depiction of reality, which is one of the things that I think makes her a really interesting thinker writer. Um, uh, and modern as well. I found I've only just started to read her poems, and I do find poems, uh, uh, um, uh, some of her poems very, very, very moving, as Alex was saying. But another way in, I think her essay about her youngest son, Francis, a child of tumult, is an extraordinary description of a mother-child. It's not a mother-child relationship. It's a mother's attempt to analyze, not to understand, to analyze what the feelings that is driving her adored little boy to extreme tantrums. I'd love to say more, but Alex's turn.
I agree. I think the essays on children, there are two or three in this anthology, are a good way in because they're very engaging, quite funny, um, quite moving too. But they're not. They don't really require you to jump from thought to thought at great speed the way some of the other essays might. And it takes a bit of acclimatizing, I think, to get used to that style. As for the archaic artificial diction, I suppose, I mean, show me a Victorian writer who isn't like that. And in fact, show me a contemporary one who isn't in a different way artificial and unlifelike. But I do see the point. There is something very kind of classical and traditionalist about Meynell's style, which some people might find Michael saying hardy. Well, we can have a dispute about that later, Michael. Um, I don't really see it as a forbidding aspect, but I think that people sometimes do find some of the poems forbidding, perhaps not necessarily the ones that I've read, because I wanted to read ones that could be understood at pace. But I think, in a way, to answer Sarah's question, if you feel intimidated by them, it's probably because you're actually sensing that there's more going on there than meets the eye, and that you're sensing the ambition and the complexity of the writing. So you're already in a good position. I think the worst position to be in is to underestimate what's going on.
Wise words to bear in mind with Meynell. And just to add my own thought, I think she's such an antidote to so many of the problems that beset us today with, lazy, quick, instantaneous, glib thinking that what she asks of readers, as you both say in your preface and your introduction, is she gives readers the respect of actually being intelligent enough to understand her. She doesn't talk down to her reader, and yet the pleasures that her work offers are both of feeling and of intellect, and of a world where the two are not easily separated.